The screams echoed through the darkness long after they had dragged him away. I remained frozen, chains cutting into my wrists, unable to turn my head toward the commotion behind me. My fellow prisoners stared forward at the dancing shadows on the wall, the only reality we had ever known. But I could no longer see them the same way. Not after what Marcus had whispered to me before they took him. Not after he described the blinding light, the painful truth, the world beyond our cave. Welcome, seekers of wisdom, to a journey that will challenge everything you thought you knew about reality, truth, and the price we pay for enlightenment. If this exploration into the darker corners of philosophy resonates with you, consider supporting this channel with a like and subscription. Your engagement allows us to continue creating content that pushes beyond the shadows and into the painful light of understanding. I never asked to have my perceptions challenged. None of us did. For as long as any of us could remember, we had been here, 50 men and women chained side by side, our necks fixed forward toward the cave wall. The shadows were our entertainment, our education, our everything. We had competitions naming them, predicting their movements, creating elaborate stories about their meanings. The most respected among us were those who could interpret the shadows with the greatest authority. Then Marcus changed everything. He had been seated beside me for years. We had grown close in the way that only those who suffer together can, speaking in whispers while the others slept, sharing what little comfort our restricted movements allowed. When the chains around his neck mysteriously loosened one night, neither of us recognized it for what it was, an opportunity that would ultimately destroy him. Elara, he had whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement. I think I can turn my head. Don't, I hissed back. You know what happened to Darius. We all remembered how Darius had strained against his chains years ago until his neck had bled. The guards had come then, dragging him away. We never heard from him again. Just a little, Marcus insisted. Just enough to see what's behind us. I wanted to argue further, but something in his voice stopped me. Perhaps some part of me was curious too. So I remained silent as he slowly, painfully turned his head for the first time in his life. His gasp was so sharp that several prisoners nearby shushed him angrily. What? I whispered. What do you see? Fire, he breathed. There's a great fire on a raised platform. And between us and the fire, he broke off, seemingly unable to process what he was witnessing. What? Tell me. People, Elara. People walking along a low wall, carrying things. Statues, objects I don't recognize. They're what's making the shadows. The shadows aren't real. I remember feeling physically ill at his words, a deep nausea rising from my core. The shadows were everything we knew. If they weren't real, what were we? What was any of this? Over the next several nights, Marcus continued to loosen his chains, turning farther each time, seeing more of the cave. He described everything in feverish whispers, the fire tenders who kept the flames consistent, the procession of people carrying objects, and beyond them, something else, a steep incline leading upward toward a light far brighter than the fire. The night Marcus disappeared began like any other. The shadows played across the wall as they always had, though I no longer watched them with the same fascination. Then I felt him shifting beside me, more violently than before. What are you doing? I whispered urgently. My hands, he replied, voice strained with effort. I can almost free them. Marcus, stop. You'll alert the guards. But he didn't stop. I heard the chains rattling, his breathing growing heavier, until suddenly, silence. Then his hand brushed mine, unchained for the first time. I'm going to see where the light comes from, he said, his voice filled with a determination I'd never heard before. I'll come back for you, Elara. I'll come back for all of you. Those were the last words he spoke to me before he crept away into the darkness behind us. For hours, I sat in terrified anticipation, straining to hear any sound of his progress. Then came a cry, part pain, part wonder, that chilled me to my bones. 3 days passed before Marcus returned. I knew it was him by the uneven footsteps approaching from behind, though the other prisoners remained oblivious, captivated by the shadow play before them. When he spoke, his voice was changed, hoarse, urgent, and filled with a manic energy. "Listen to me," he called out, loud enough for all to hear. "Everything you see is a lie. These shadows, they're just reflections of artificial objects. I've seen the sun, the real sun. I've seen trees that aren't made of shadow. I've touched water that flows clear as." The uproar was immediate. Prisoners screamed for him to be silent. Some cried out for the guards. Others wept in confusion and fear. I alone remained quiet, torn between longing to believe him and terror of what his words meant. When the guards came, their footsteps thundered through the cave. I heard Marcus struggle, heard the sickening sound of blows landing on flesh, heard him crying out even as they dragged him away, "You have to believe me. You're living in darkness. There's a whole world beyond." His voice faded, and the cave eventually returned to silence. The prisoners gradually calmed, returning their attention to the shadows as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed for me. That was 3 days ago. Since then, I've felt my own chains, not just the physical ones binding my limbs, but the mental ones that had kept me complacent. Each night, I work at them, loosening them bit by bit. Tonight, I think I might finally break free. But the question that keeps me awake is this: if I escape and see what Marcus saw, what then? Do I flee into the world of light and leave my fellow prisoners behind? Do I return to them, knowing they might react with violence as they did to Marcus? Is the truth worth dying for? And perhaps most terrifying of all, what if Marcus was wrong? What if what he saw was just another layer of illusion, another cave with slightly more convincing shadows? How can we ever know when we've reached true reality? These questions haunt me as I work at my chains in the darkness. Freedom, I'm beginning to understand, might be far more terrible than captivity. The day I finally broke free from my chains was the day I began to understand the true horror of enlightenment. After nights of slowly working the metal links back and forth, weakening them where they had rusted, I felt the restraint around my right wrist give way with a small snap. The sound, though barely audible, sent a jolt of panic through me. I froze, waiting for the guards to come, but the cave remained quiet except for the occasional murmur from my fellow prisoners as they commented on the shadow play. With painful slowness, I freed my other hand, then my ankles, and finally, most difficult of all, the collar around my neck. Each movement was agony. My muscles, atrophied from lifelong restraint, screamed in protest. When I finally turned my head, the pain was so intense that I nearly cried out. What I saw confirmed everything Marcus had told me. Behind us burned a great fire on a raised platform. Between the fire and our row of chained prisoners ran a walkway where robed figures carried objects, sculptures of animals, people, and things I couldn't name. Their shadows, cast by the fire, were the shapes we had spent our lives watching on the cave wall. I should have felt vindication. Instead, I felt sick. My entire existence had been spent analyzing illusions. The respected elders of our prisoner society, those who claimed to understand the patterns of the shadows better than anyone, knew nothing. They were experts in phantoms. Moving with excruciating care, I crawled away from my spot, terrified that someone would notice my absence. None did. The prisoners remained fixated on the wall, and the people carrying objects seemed focused on their own mysterious task, never glancing toward us. Beyond the fire platform, just as Marcus had described, a steep path wound upward. The climb was brutal. Having never walked before, every step was a lesson in pain. My legs buckled repeatedly, my palms were bloody from breaking my falls. But something pulled me forward, the growing brightness at the path's end. When I finally emerged from the cave's mouth, the light struck me like a physical blow. I collapsed, screaming, my hands covering my eyes. The pain was unbearable, as if someone had poured liquid fire directly into my skull. I writhed on the ground, curling into myself, begging for the darkness to return. Gradually, agonizingly, my eyes began to adjust. First, I could make out only the vaguest shapes, dark masses against blinding brightness. Slowly, these resolved into what I would later learn were trees, rocks, clouds. And above it all, the sun, so brilliant I could look at it only for a split second before the pain forced my gaze away. I spent that first day simply learning to see. By sunset, I could make out colors, the green of leaves, the blue of the sky, the brown of earth. When darkness fell, bringing relief to my tortured eyes, I discovered stars, countless points of light scattered across the blackness. I wept at their beauty, at the sheer vastness above me. But with this expanding vision came expanding questions. Who had built the cave? Who were the people carrying objects? Why keep prisoners at all? Most disturbing of all, had I truly escaped, or was this merely another, larger cave with its own set of illusions? I slept fitfully that first night under the stars, waking often to the unfamiliar sounds of wind in trees and distant animal calls. When dawn came, painting the sky in colors I had no names for, I faced my first real decision: continue exploring this new world, or return to the cave to tell the others. The memory of what had happened to Marcus should have deterred me. Yet I couldn't bear the thought of my fellow prisoners, my friends, living their entire lives staring at shadows when this vivid reality existed. I had to try. Perhaps coming from me, someone they knew and trusted, the truth might be received differently. The journey back down the path was faster but no less painful. My newly awakened senses were assaulted by the growing darkness as I descended. When I re-entered the cave proper, the fire that had seemed so bright before now appeared weak and smoky. The figures carrying objects looked sad in their repetitive task. And my fellow prisoners, chained in their rows, seemed so pitifully unaware that I felt my heart breaking for them. I approached carefully, calling out softly as I neared. "Friends, it's me, Elara. I've seen what lies beyond the cave. I've seen the source of the shadows." The reaction was immediate and violent. Prisoners strained against their chains, voices rising in anger and fear. "Blasphemer! Liar! She's gone mad like Marcus." Adam, who had been chained beside me for decades, called out with particular venom, "The shadows are all there is, all there ever has been. To claim otherwise is dangerous insanity." I moved closer, desperate to make them understand. "Please listen. The shadows are just reflections of objects carried past a fire. There's a whole world outside, with light so bright it hurts at first, but once your eyes adjust." "Guards!" someone shouted. "An escaped prisoner. Guards!" I should have run then. I should have fled back up the path to the world of light. But I couldn't leave them, couldn't abandon them to their illusions. So I stayed, trying to explain, even as I heard the heavy footsteps of approaching guards. They came in greater numbers this time, as if they'd learned from Marcus's capture that the enlightened fought harder for their freedom. I did fight, with a strength I didn't know I possessed. But there were too many. They beat me until my newly discovered world went dark again. When I regained consciousness, I was back in chains. Not in my old spot, they were too clever for that. They placed me at the far end of the row, away from those I might influence. The chains were newer, stronger, with no hope of breaking them as I had the old ones. A special restraint had been added to prevent me from turning my head even slightly. The shadows continued their dance on the wall before me. Once, they had been my entire universe. Now they were a torment, pale, flat imitations of the vibrant world I had glimpsed. I knew what cast them. I knew what lay beyond. And that knowledge was a unique form of suffering. In the days that followed, I learned the true nature of the cave. The guards, I discovered, were former prisoners themselves, ones who had been specially selected and trained. Some had even been shown the outside world, but in controlled, limited ways. They had seen enough to perform their duties but not enough to question the system itself. The people carrying objects were members of a society that existed in an intermediate zone, neither in the depths of the cave nor in the full light of the outside world. They lived in a state of partial enlightenment, knowing more than the prisoners but far less than what I had seen. And governing it all was a council of philosophers who believed that most humans couldn't handle full reality, that society functioned best when the majority lived with comfortable illusions. Only a select few were deemed worthy of complete enlightenment. The rest were kept at various levels of ignorance, each group believing their level of understanding was complete. This knowledge came to me gradually, through whispered conversations with a young guard named Theo. Unlike the others, he seemed troubled by his role. During night shifts, when the other guards dozed and the prisoners slept, he would come to me with questions about what I had seen outside. "Is it true the sun moves across the sky?" he asked one night. "They've only let me see it at midday, from a sheltered viewpoint." "It travels from one horizon to the other," I told him. "And when it sets, the sky burns with colors you cannot imagine." Another night, "Are there truly bodies of water larger than the drinking pool were shown?" "So vast you cannot see across them," I confirmed. "With waves that rise higher than 3 men." Each conversation seemed to affect him deeply. I saw the conflict in his eyes, the fear of having his worldview shattered against the longing to know truth. I recognized it because I had felt the same in those first moments after Marcus told me about the fire behind us. "Why do they keep us ignorant?" he asked during one of our final conversations. "If the world outside is so wondrous, why hide it?" "I believe they think they're protecting people," I said. "The transition is painful. Physically painful as your eyes adjust, but also spiritually painful as everything you believed crumbles away. Perhaps they think most couldn't survive that pain. Or perhaps," Theo suggested, his voice hardening, "those in power simply wish to remain there." That was the last night he came to speak with me. The next day, his place was taken by a different guard. When I asked about him, the new guard's face darkened. "Traitors aren't discussed," he said sharply, and refused to speak to me again. Weeks passed. My eyes, once adjusted to the brilliant light of the outside world, gradually readapted to the dimness of the cave. But my mind could not forget. The memories of colors, of depth, of the infinite sky haunted me. I began to wonder if death might be preferable to living with the knowledge of what I was missing. Then came the night of fire. I was awakened by shouting, not the usual sounds of prisoners talking in their sleep or guards changing shifts, but urgent, panicked cries. The cave, normally dark except for the fire behind us, was unusually bright. The shadows on the wall before me were chaotic, no longer following their usual patterns. The smell reached me next, smoke, but also something else. Blood. The shouts grew louder, punctuated by sounds of fighting. I strained against my chains, desperate to see what was happening, but could only stare helplessly at the wall as the shadows enacted some violent drama behind me. "What's happening?" I called out to the prisoners around me. "What do you see?" "A new shadow play," one replied, sounding confused but not alarmed. "Though I don't understand the story." They couldn't comprehend that what they were seeing was not entertainment but the silhouettes of actual violence occurring behind them. The shadows of fighting, of people falling, meant nothing to them beyond novel patterns on their wall. A figure appeared beside me suddenly, a human shape rather than a shadow. In the dim light, I couldn't make out the face clearly until he knelt down. "Theo," I gasped. His face was streaked with soot and blood. His eyes, once hesitant, now burned with purpose. "I'm freeing you," he said, working at my chains with a key. "We're freeing everyone." "We?" "Those who chose truth over comfort. We've been planning for weeks, gathering allies among the guards, the object carriers, even some members of the council who've grown disillusioned with the system." As my chains fell away, I began to understand the scale of what was happening. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a revolution. All around me, other guards were unlocking prisoners. Some fled immediately toward the path leading upward. Others remained seated, refusing to move despite being freed, clinging to the familiar even as chaos erupted around them. "We need your help," Theo said, pulling me to my feet. My muscles, atrophied again from weeks of immobility, protested sharply. "Many of the prisoners won't leave willingly. They need to hear from someone who's seen the outside and returned." "They didn't listen before," I reminded him, remembering the violent rejection of my truth-telling. "They might now. Especially when they see how many of us are helping." He was right. Standing on shaky legs before groups of newly unchained prisoners, I found them far more receptive than before. The presence of guards and object carriers supporting my story lent it credibility. More importantly, the disruption of their familiar routine had created a crack in their certainty, a space where new ideas could take root. "The shadows you've watched all your lives are just pale imitations," I told them. "Outside this cave exists a world of such beauty and complexity that it will overwhelm you at first. The transition will be painful, I won't lie about that. Your eyes will hurt, your mind will resist. But beyond that pain lies a reality worth experiencing." Some turned away. Some covered their ears. But many, more than I had dared hope, listened. And of those, most chose to follow us up the path toward the cave's exit. The journey upward was slow and difficult. Many couldn't walk properly, just as I couldn't when I first escaped. We formed chains of support, the stronger helping the weaker, those whose eyes had already adjusted to the light guiding those still blinded by it. The path, which had seemed so desolate during my solitary journey, now teemed with humanity, hundreds of people at various stages of enlightenment, all moving gradually toward greater truth. When we reached the cave's mouth, the sun was just rising. I heard the screams as the first wave of prisoners emerged into direct light. I remembered my own pain and moved among them with water-soaked cloths to cover their eyes, explaining that the adjustment must be gradual. "Small glimpses," I instructed. "Look, then cover your eyes. Look a little longer, then cover them again. Your vision will adjust, but you must be patient." Throughout that day, more and more emerged from the cave. Not all who started the journey completed it. Some turned back, preferring familiar darkness to painful light. Others collapsed from the physical strain. A few, I later learned, even attacked their rescuers, so profound was their fear of change. But by sunset, hundreds sat or lay on the grassy hillside outside the cave, their expressions a mixture of pain, wonder, and profound disorientation. As darkness fell and the stars appeared, many saw the night sky for the first time. The gasps and cries of awe as they beheld the cosmos brought tears to my eyes. Theo found me as I sat watching the stars alongside newly freed prisoners, explaining constellations I had learned during my brief time outside. "The revolution isn't complete," he said without preamble. "The High Council has retreated to the lower levels of the cave system. They're organizing resistance." "What do they hope to accomplish?" I asked. "The prisoners are free. Not all of them. Some refuse to leave. Others never made it up the path. And the council believes that many will voluntarily return to the cave once the initial wonder wears off and they face the challenges of living in the real world." I considered this, remembering how overwhelming my own first days of freedom had been. They might be right. Freedom is difficult. Truth is painful. Some may indeed choose to return to their chains. Theo's expression hardened. "Then we must make the cave uninhabitable. Destroy the fire platform, block the lower passages." "No," I interrupted firmly. "We can't force enlightenment on anyone. That would make us no better than those who kept everyone prisoner." "Then what do you suggest? Allow the council to rebuild their system of controlled ignorance?" I looked out over the hillside, where hundreds of former prisoners were experiencing their first night under the stars. Some were weeping. Some were laughing. Many were silent, their faces reflecting a profound reorganization of their understanding of reality. "We create a community here," I said finally. "A place where those who choose truth can live together and support each other through the pain of adjustment. We send emissaries back to the cave, not to force anyone out, but to ensure that those who remain do so by choice, with full knowledge of what they're choosing." "And the council?" "We offer them the same choice we offer everyone else: join us in the light, with all the pain and wonder that entails, or remain in their partial darkness. But we dismantle their power to decide for others." Theo didn't look entirely satisfied with this answer, but he nodded reluctantly. "And what about those who've seen the light but find they can't bear it? Who want to return to the cave?" This was the hardest question of all, and one I had been asking myself since my own first glimpse of the sun. Once you've seen reality, can you ever truly return to illusion? Even if you physically go back to the cave, wouldn't the memory of light haunt you forever? "I don't know," I admitted. "Perhaps that's a choice each person must make for themselves. But I suspect that once true light has been seen, the shadows never look quite the same again." The community we built outside the cave came to be known simply as Aletheia, truth. In those first chaotic months, our focus was purely on survival. Few of us had practical skills for living in the outside world. We had to learn everything from scratch: how to build shelters, find food, make clothing, treat injuries. The learning curve was steep, and there were deaths that might have been preventable with greater knowledge. But gradually, we established ourselves. Homes were built along the hillside facing the rising sun. Gardens were planted. A system of governance emerged, not perfect, but more transparent than what had ruled the cave. Former prisoners, guards, and object carriers worked alongside each other, the old hierarchies dissolving in the face of shared challenges. As Theo had predicted, some did return to the cave. The constant stimulation of the outside world proved too much for them, too bright, too loud, too unpredictable. They sought the comfort of limited sensory input, of a world small enough to be fully comprehensible. We did not stop them, though each departure felt like a personal failure to me. "You can't save everyone from their own choices," Theo told me after a particularly difficult day when a group of 10 former prisoners announced their intention to return below. "Freedom means allowing people to choose wrongly." "Is it wrong, though?" I countered. "Who are we to say that our way of living is the only right one?" This question troubled me increasingly as our settlement grew and stabilized. We had assumed that truth was objectively better than illusion, that light was inherently preferable to darkness. But watching the struggles of many to adjust, their nightmares, their sensory overloads, their existential crises, I began to wonder if our revolution had been an act of liberation or an imposition of our own values on others. One winter evening, about 2 years after the uprising, I hiked to the cave entrance. I did this periodically to speak with those who lived in the transitional areas, former prisoners who moved back and forth between the outside world and the upper levels of the cave system, gradually acclimating themselves to full reality. Usually, I found a few people there, sitting in the cave mouth, practicing looking at the outside world in small doses. This time, I found someone unexpected: Adam, the man who had been chained beside me for decades and who had called for the guards when I tried to tell him about the outside world. He sat just inside the cave entrance, his back against the stone wall, his eyes fixed on the patch of sky visible from his position. "Adam," I said, unable to keep the surprise from my voice. "I didn't know you had left the main chamber." He turned toward me, and I was struck by how aged he looked. In the cave's darkness, we had all been ageless to each other. In the revealing light of day, I could see that he was an old man, his face deeply lined, his hair completely white. "Elara," he acknowledged with a nod. "I've been making my way up slowly. It's taken me nearly a year to reach this point." I sat down beside him, maintaining a respectful distance. "What changed your mind? You were quite adamant about staying." A faint smile crossed his face. "I was terrified. We all were. Our entire existence was structured around the shadows. To suggest they weren't real was to attack the very foundation of our identity. He paused, looking back toward the sky. But after you all left, the shadows stopped making sense. The patterns changed. Sometimes they disappeared entirely when the fire went out. Without the object carriers maintaining the illusion, the reality of our situation became harder to ignore. So you decided to see for yourself. Not immediately. First, I tried to rebuild. Some of us established a new social order in the main chamber. We created our own interpretations of the shadows, appointed new experts. We tried to carry on as if nothing had changed. His voice grew quieter. But there was a hollowness to it. Deep down, we knew we were play-acting. We sat in silence for a while, watching as the day's light began to fade and the first stars appeared. "Does it get easier?" he asked finally. "Seeing so much? Knowing so much?" I considered the question carefully. "The physical discomfort passes. Your eyes adjust, your ears become accustomed to the variety of sounds, your skin adapts to feeling wind and temperature changes. But the existential adjustment, understanding your place in this vast reality, that's ongoing. I'm not sure it ever ends. Is it worth it?" Again, I took time with my answer. For me, yes. Despite the challenges, despite the pain of adjustment, despite the moments of overwhelming confusion. I would not return to the shadows permanently. But I cannot and will not make that judgment for anyone else. Adam nodded slowly. Tomorrow I plan to step fully outside for the first time. Would you be willing to guide me? I would be honored, I said, deeply moved by his request. This man who had once called for my punishment was now asking for my help in facing the truth I had tried to share with him. As promised, I returned the next morning. Adam was waiting, visibly nervous but determined. Together, we stepped out of the cave into the full morning light. He cried out, covering his eyes immediately, and I supported him as his legs threatened to give way beneath him. "Breathe," I instructed. "Keep your eyes closed for now. Feel the sun on your skin. Feel the ground beneath your feet. Smell the air." Gradually, following my guidance, he opened his eyes in brief increments, allowing them to adjust. By midday, he could look around for several minutes at a time before needing to rest. By sunset, he had seen his first horizon, his first cloud formations, his first flock of birds in flight. With each new sight, his expression shifted between pain, wonder, and profound recalibration. "It's too much," he said as we sat watching the sunset paint the sky in colors he had never imagined. "How do you make sense of it all?" "You don't, not completely," I admitted. "You learn to focus on what's immediately relevant while maintaining awareness of the greater context. You develop filters. But the feeling of being overwhelmed never entirely disappears, at least it hasn't for me. And that's acceptable to you? Living with that constant sense of exceeding your capacity for understanding?" I smiled. "I've come to see it as the natural state of being truly alive." In the cave, we had the illusion of comprehensiveness. We thought the shadows constituted the entirety of existence, and that by mastering their patterns, we understood reality. Out here, we're confronted constantly with the vastness beyond our comprehension. There's something both humbling and liberating in that. Adam didn't respond immediately. He watched as the sun disappeared below the horizon, leaving behind a palette of purples and deep blues that gradually gave way to the black canvas of night. "I don't know if I can live with such uncertainty," he said finally. In the cave, there were answers. Out here, there seemed to be only more questions. "Yes," I said simply. "That's the bargain we make for truth." Adam did not return to the cave. Though he struggled tremendously with the adjustment to outside life, he persisted, eventually becoming a valuable member of our community. His experience became a pattern I observed repeatedly: those who managed to push through the initial disorientation often discovered a depth of engagement with reality that they couldn't have imagined in their shadow-watching days. But not everyone followed this path. Over the years, a steady stream of former prisoners chose to return to the cave system. Some went all the way back to the main chamber, resuming their position as shadow watchers, though without the physical chains. Others established settlements at various points along the path, creating communities with different levels of exposure to outside reality. What emerged was a spectrum of enlightenment, a recognition that perhaps truth wasn't an all-or-nothing proposition, but rather a continuum that each person navigated according to their capacity and preference. This realization fundamentally changed our approach. Rather than seeing the cave dwellers as prisoners needing liberation, we came to understand them as people making different choices about how much reality they could or wished to process. Our role shifted from liberators to facilitators, ensuring that movement along the spectrum in either direction remained possible, that no one was forced to accept more truth than they could handle, and that no one was prevented from seeking greater truth if they desired it. The High Council that had once ruled the cave eventually dissolved, its members either joining the outside community, establishing positions in the middle settlements, or aging and dying. The rigid caste system that had separated prisoners, object carriers, and guards gave way to a more fluid social order based on individual choice rather than imposed hierarchy. I found my own place as a guide, someone who helped others navigate transitions between different levels of reality exposure. The work suited me. Having experienced both the complete darkness of the cave and the full light of the outside world, I could understand and empathize with people wherever they were on their journey. It was in this capacity that I met Elara, a young woman who had been born in the cave after the revolution. Her parents had been among those who chose to return to the main chamber, preferring the simpler existence of shadow watching to the complexities of outside life. Elara had grown up knowing that an outside world existed. The post-revolution cave dwellers didn't hide this fact as the old regime had, but she had never seen it. When she turned 18, she decided to make the journey upward, against her parents' wishes. She arrived at my dwelling on the hillside one spring morning, introduced by one of the transition guides who worked in the cave system. Elara wishes to experience full reality, the guide explained. She's been preparing for months, strengthening her body for the journey and gradually increasing her exposure to brighter light sources. She's ready for the final transition. I invited her to sit with me on my porch overlooking the valley below. She moved with the awkwardness of someone not accustomed to walking on uneven ground, but her determination was evident in every careful step. "Why do you want to leave the cave?" I asked her once we were settled. It was a question I posed to every transitioning person, and their answers often revealed much about their readiness for the journey. "Because I want to know if the stories are true," she replied. "My whole life, I've heard tales about the sun, the stars, the wind, the endless space above. Some say these things are wondrous beyond imagination. Others say they're terrifying, that they drive people mad with their immensity. I need to know for myself." "Both descriptions are accurate," I told her. "The outside world is both wondrous and terrifying. It will expand your conception of reality in ways that might feel like madness at first. Are you prepared for that?" She met my gaze steadily. "No one can be fully prepared for what they haven't experienced. But I'm willing to face whatever comes." Her answer impressed me. Most cave dwellers approached the transition with either naive enthusiasm or debilitating fear. Elara showed a mature balance, a realistic assessment of the challenge coupled with the courage to face it anyway. Over the next weeks, I guided her through the final stages of transition. We began with dawn and dusk exposures, when the light was gentlest. Gradually, we extended into midday, her eyes protected at first by tinted glasses that we slowly made lighter. Each session was followed by discussions about what she had seen and experienced, not just the physical sensations but the emotional and philosophical impacts as well. "I never understood color before," she said after her first sunset viewing. "In the cave, we have firelight and shadow, essentially just variations of orange and black. But this She gestured toward the horizon where the sky was painted in shades of pink, purple, gold, and blue. How do you ever become accustomed to such variety? You don't, not completely, I told her. Even after all these years, sunsets still stop me in my tracks. But you do develop a different relationship with the wonder. It becomes less overwhelming, more integrated into your daily experience. On another occasion, after her first experience of rain, she asked a question that cut to the heart of our philosophical differences with the cave dwellers. In the cave, she said, water still dripping from her hair, everything is controlled. The fire is maintained at a consistent level, the shadows follow predictable patterns. Out here, it seems that change is constant. The weather shifts, the light changes throughout the day, animals and plants grow and die. How do you build a sense of security in such an unpredictable environment? Security in the cave is largely an illusion, I explained. The fire could go out, the roof could collapse, disease could spread. The difference is that in the cave, you're powerless against such eventualities. Out here, we've developed adaptability. Rather than seeking absolute control or predictability, we learn to respond fluidly to changing conditions. She considered this. So security comes not from preventing change but from developing the capacity to navigate it? Exactly. In the cave, the illusion of security is maintained through limitation, by restricting experience to a narrow range of possibilities. Outside, we find security in expansion, by developing the inner resources to engage with a fuller spectrum of reality. This concept seemed to resonate deeply with Lyra. Unlike many transitioning cave dwellers who struggled with the philosophical implications of expanded reality, she embraced them. Her questions were incisive, her observations thoughtful. She moved through the transition process more quickly than most, eager to absorb every new experience and integrate it into her developing worldview. By midsummer, she was living fully in the outside community, though she made regular visits back to the cave to see her family and share carefully selected aspects of her new knowledge with them. This bridge building between the different reality communities became increasingly common as the years passed, reducing the isolation that had characterized the early post-revolution period. One evening, as Lyra and I sat by a community fire under a star-filled sky, she raised a question that had been increasingly on my mind as well. Do you think there might be realities beyond this one? She asked, her gaze fixed on the Milky Way stretching across the darkness above. Perhaps this world is itself another kind of cave, with shadows of an even greater reality that we can't yet perceive. The question sent a familiar chill through me, the same sensation I had felt when Marcus first told me about the fire behind us in the cave. The vertigo of realizing that what you've accepted as complete might be merely a fragment of something far larger. I've wondered the same, I admitted. The pattern suggests itself, doesn't it? Just as the shadows were projections of objects we couldn't initially see, perhaps everything we perceive here is a limited representation of something more fundamental that we lack the senses or concepts to grasp directly. And if that's true, Lyra continued, might there be another path leading upward from this reality to the next level? Another painful transition awaiting those who seek deeper truth? I looked around at our community, at the homes and gardens spread across the hillside, at the people gathered around various fires, engaged in conversation or simply resting after the day's work. All of this seemed so solid, so real compared to the shadow play of the cave. Yet Lyra's question had awakened the unsettling possibility that our hard-won reality might itself be another level of illusion. If such a path exists, I said finally, I suspect it would require a different kind of movement than the physical journey from the cave. Perhaps it's a shift in consciousness or perception rather than location. And would you take it? She asked. If you discovered such a path, would you be willing to undergo another painful awakening? I considered the question honestly, remembering the agony of my first exposure to sunlight, the disorientation of seeing depth and color for the first time, the existential vertigo of realizing how limited my previous understanding had been. Yes, I said eventually. Not without fear, but yes. Once you've experienced the expansion that comes with greater truth, it's difficult to be satisfied with less. The pain of transition is temporary, but the pain of knowing that more exists and choosing not to seek it, that's a different kind of suffering entirely. Lyra nodded, her expression suggesting she'd reached a similar conclusion. We sat in contemplative silence, watching the stars whirl slowly overhead, each lost in private thoughts about the nature of reality and our place within it. As the fire burned lower and community members gradually dispersed to their homes, I found myself reflecting on the long journey from my days as a chained prisoner. The path had not been what I expected. The liberation I had envisioned, a simple movement from darkness to light, from ignorance to knowledge, had proven far more complex, nuanced, and ongoing than I could have imagined. The true lesson of the cave, I realized, wasn't about a single awakening but about the never-ending process of awakening itself. Each level of reality we achieve reveals new depths to be explored, new illusions to be penetrated, new truths to be integrated. The shadows never end, they merely become more subtle as our perception refines. And perhaps that endless unfolding is not a cause for despair but the very essence of what makes consciousness precious, this capacity to continually transcend our limitations, to persistently seek deeper understanding despite the pain involved, to forever walk the path from darkness toward greater light. Years passed. Our community thrived, expanding across the hillside surrounding the cave entrance. The strict division between cave dwellers and surface dwellers gradually dissolved, replaced by a more fluid arrangement where individuals could choose their level of engagement with full reality, moving back and forth between different environments as their capacity and preference dictated. I continued my work as a transition guide well into old age, helping countless people navigate the difficult journey from shadow to substance. Each person's process was unique, yet patterns emerged, the predictable stages of disorientation, resistance, gradual adaptation, and eventual integration that characterized the movement toward expanded awareness. As my physical strength waned, I found myself drawn increasingly toward teaching and philosophical exploration. The questions Lyra had raised about higher levels of reality beyond our current perception became central to my thinking. I began gathering others interested in this inquiry, both longtime surface dwellers and more recent arrivals from the cave, to explore the possibility of further awakening. We called ourselves the Seekers, and our discussions ranged widely across mathematics, astronomy, art, meditation, and the nature of consciousness itself. We weren't searching for a physical path upward as I had once found leading out of the cave, but rather for methodologies of perception that might reveal aspects of reality currently hidden from us. Some thought the key lay in developing new technologies to extend our senses beyond their natural limitations. Others believed the answer was internal, that disciplines of mind and consciousness could pierce the veil of ordinary perception. Still others suggested that perhaps death itself was the transition to the next level of reality, the ultimate release from our current cave. I remained agnostic about the specific path while convinced of the broader principle, that our current understanding, however expanded from our cave days, remained profoundly limited. On the 70th anniversary of the cave liberation, a celebration was held throughout the community. As one of the few remaining original revolutionaries, I was asked to speak. Though my body had grown frail, my mind remained clear, and I welcomed the opportunity to share the perspective that decades of reflection had granted me. The gathering place was a large amphitheater carved into the hillside facing the cave entrance, a deliberate architectural choice that kept our origins literally in view. As I made my way slowly to the speaker's platform, supported by Lyra, now middle-aged herself and a respected community leader, I saw faces from every part of our society. Former cave dwellers sat alongside lifelong surface people. Teenagers born into full reality mingled with elders who had spent most of their lives in shadow. 70 years ago, I began, my voice carrying surprising strength despite my age. A group of prisoners broke free from their chains and stumbled toward a light they barely understood. The journey was painful. The adjustment was difficult. Many questioned whether the truth was worth the suffering it entailed. I paused, looking out over the gathered community, hundreds of lives touched in some way by that long-ago revolution. Today, We honor not just that original act of liberation but the more subtle revolution that followed, the recognition that freedom isn't about forcing everyone into the brightest light possible, but about ensuring each person's right to determine how much truth they are ready to engage with. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. The allegory of the cave, first articulated by the philosopher Plato thousands of years ago, is typically understood as a simple parable about ignorance versus knowledge. The prisoners represent the unenlightened masses, the freed prisoner represents the philosopher who achieves wisdom and returns to help others. I shook my head slowly. But I have come to believe that the allegory holds a darker and more profound meaning, one that Plato perhaps intended but that can only be fully grasped by those who have actually lived the journey from shadow to substance. The audience grew quieter, leaning forward to catch my words. The darker truth is this: enlightenment is not a destination but a process without end. Each level of reality we achieve reveals itself eventually as another, more subtle cave. The shadows become increasingly sophisticated, increasingly difficult to recognize as shadows. And with each new level of awakening comes greater pain, greater disorientation, and greater resistance. I looked toward the cave entrance, visible in the distance. Those who remain in the deepest cave, watching the simple shadow play of firelight, experience a kind of innocence, a bounded reality with clear rules and patterns. Those of us who have ventured outside bear the burden of greater awareness. We have seen enough to know how limited our perception remains, yet not enough to resolve the deeper mysteries that awareness reveals. I turned back to the audience. And that is the true darkness at the heart of the allegory, the recognition that full enlightenment may be structurally impossible for beings like ourselves. We can always go further than we are, but we can never arrive at complete understanding. Each step toward greater truth brings not final clarity but more sophisticated questions. A heavy silence fell over the gathering. I had challenged the optimistic narrative that had sustained our community, the belief that we had achieved true enlightenment compared to our cave-dwelling days. But, I continued, my voice softening, within this darkness lies a profound dignity. For what makes consciousness precious is not the possession of final truth but the endless capacity for growth, the ability to continually transcend our current limitations despite the pain involved. I gestured toward the diverse gathering before me. Look at what we've created here, not a community of the perfectly enlightened, but a community dedicated to the ongoing process of awakening, where each person is supported in moving at their own pace toward greater understanding. The true revolution wasn't the breaking of physical chains but the recognition of each individual's right to determine their own relationship with truth. I paused, gathering my strength for the conclusion. As I approach the end of my life, I find myself increasingly convinced that what matters is not how far we have traveled from the cave but the direction we face. Are we turned toward greater truth, however painful, or away from it toward the comfort of familiar shadows? The darkness in Plato's allegory isn't the cave itself but the possibility that, given the choice, many would prefer comfortable illusion to difficult reality. My gaze swept across the audience one final time. Let us honor the courage of every person who chooses to face the light, whether they take their first steps out of the deepest cave or stand at the frontiers of our current understanding, searching for the next level of awakening. For in that choice, the willingness to endure the pain of greater awareness, lies the highest expression of what it means to be truly human. As I finished speaking, the gathering remained silent for several heartbeats before erupting into applause. The response suggested my words had touched something deep, perhaps the recognition among many that their own journey from shadow to substance remained incomplete, that comfortable certainties they had established since leaving the cave might themselves be illusions awaiting further penetration. That evening, as the celebration continued around me, Elara accompanied me back to my dwelling on the highest part of the hillside. My home was simple but positioned to capture both sunrise and sunset, with a clear view of the stars at night, a deliberate choice reflecting my commitment to maximum exposure to natural reality. Your speech has stirred quite a debate, Elara observed as we walked slowly. Some are inspired by the idea of further awakening. Others are unsettled by the suggestion that our current understanding remains profoundly limited. I smiled. Good. Complacency is the subtlest cave, the belief that we have finally arrived at true reality when we've merely reached another level of representation. We reached my porch and sat watching as the last light faded from the sky. The first stars were beginning to appear, those ancient lights that had so amazed me when I first emerged from the cave decades earlier. Do you regret any of it? Lyra asked after a comfortable silence. The revolution, the pain of transition, the challenges of building a new society? I considered the question carefully, as was my habit. I regret that we couldn't find a way to help everyone make the journey successfully. I regret the suffering of those who tried to face more reality than they were ready for. But the awakening itself? No. Despite everything, I cannot regret the movement toward greater truth, however incomplete it remains. Lyra nodded, her expression thoughtful. I've been working with the youngest generation, she said. Those born entirely in the outside world, who have never known the cave except through stories. They have a different relationship with reality than either the former cave dwellers or the revolutionaries like yourself. How so? They take for granted what amazed your generation, the sun, the stars, the natural world. But they seem to sense intuitively what you spoke about today, that there are further levels of reality beyond our current perception. They're less attached to the physical world as the final reality, more open to the possibility of fundamental paradigm shifts in understanding. This observation filled me with unexpected hope. Perhaps each generation moved naturally toward greater capacity for truth, not by rejecting the insights of their predecessors but by integrating and then transcending them, climbing higher on a ladder of awakening that had no final rung. They will go further than we have, I said softly. They must, if the journey toward truth is to continue. And they will, Lyra assured me. Your legacy isn't just the physical liberation from the cave but the establishment of a culture that values the pursuit of deeper understanding, however difficult or disorienting that pursuit might be. We sat together as full darkness fell and the Milky Way revealed itself across the sky, that great river of light that had been entirely unknown to me during my decades in the cave. Its beauty still moved me deeply, all the more so for the awareness that what I perceived as stars were themselves merely the visible manifestations of cosmic processes largely beyond my comprehension. In that moment, I felt with particular clarity the truth I had tried to express in my speech, that enlightenment was not a state to be achieved but a direction to be faced, an endless turning toward greater light despite the certainty that complete illumination would forever exceed our grasp. And in that endless turning lay a profound kind of peace, not the peace of final answers but the peace of rightful orientation, of facing in the direction that honors the deepest potential of consciousness. Whatever cave still awaited discovery, whatever shadows still danced on the walls of my perception, I had kept faith with the fundamental imperative to move toward greater truth rather than retreat into comfortable illusion. As the night deepened around us, I found myself silently addressing those who might discover their own chains in times to come, who might find their own paths leading upward from whatever cave currently bounded their reality. The journey will be painful. The light will hurt your eyes. Everything you believe to be solid will reveal itself as shadow. But keep walking toward the brightness, however slowly you must move, however often you must rest. For in that movement itself, in the willingness to face greater truth despite the suffering involved, you fulfill the highest purpose of consciousness. You honor the light by turning toward it, even when you cannot reach it, even when it blinds you, even when it burns away everything you thought you were. This is the darkness at the heart of enlightenment, and also its most profound gift, that the journey never ends, that growth continues, that awakening is not a moment but a process without conclusion. And in that endless becoming lies our deepest dignity as beings capable of transcending our own limitations, again and again and again, moving forever from shadow toward substance, from cave toward cosmos, from illusion toward truth. If this exploration of the darker meaning behind Plato's Allegory resonated with you, I invite you to continue the conversation in the comments below. How have you experienced the painful journey from comfortable illusion to challenging reality in your own life? What shadows might we still be mistaking for substance? Remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more philosophical explorations that go beyond conventional interpretations. By supporting this work, you help create space for the kind of deep thinking our world so desperately needs. Until next time, may you face the light, however painful, and find dignity in the endless journey of awakening.